2 Kings 16 and 17 and 2 Chronicles 28. Well, we're hearing the end of the northern kingdom in this reading, but before we get there, let's do two more kings in the south. Jotham, who is the son of Uzziah or Azariah, he reigns for 16 years. He's a good king, but not totally good. Everyone's compared to David again, and he doesn't live up to David's reign in the sense he allows high places to continue, which again is worship of other gods on hills. Ahaz is his son. This is the same Ahaz, and he will reign 16 years. And he's bad with a capital B, as you read. This is the Ahaz of Isaiah 7, and that prophecy of a woman bearing a child. Isaiah is his court prophet, as he probably was for Jotham as well. And so that's where that Isaiah 7 story fits, right in here. Ahaz, this is the first mention of what's called the valley, and I want to bring it up here because it will come up in the New Testament, the valley of Hinnom. Now, Hinnom seems to be a proper name. Sometimes it's called the valley of the sons of Hinnom, and we don't know who Hinnom is. In Aramaic, the word for valley is Ge, and this is where we get by transliteration Gehinnom, Gehenna, which in the New Testament, by the time of the New Testament, this valley, which is on just the southeast side of the city of Jerusalem, will have turned into a picture, a word picture, almost a metaphor for eternal punishment. So we'll talk about the concept of hell, which comes from the word Gehenna, which comes from the word or the phrase Valley of Hinnom in the Old Testament. The reason it turns into that horrific idea is because in the days of Ahaz, and this is the first time it's mentioned, it will be repeated in other kings, but there is child sacrifice going on in this valley, and it reflects, it says very carefully, it reflects the kind of sacrifice that had been going on in the days of Joshua's campaign to rid this nation of the Gentiles of that time. So the idea that other gods want you to kill your children is, I think, taught rather explicitly in these kinds of stories, that when you go about to worship other gods, you may not know it on the front end, but by the time you get into the active worship of another deity like this, the idea of hurting your own children becomes part and parcel of that kind of religion, and that will be something, again, to watch for going forward. Well, the king of the north, he's the last king to reign of the 19. His name is Hoshea. Hoshea is, of course, very wicked. It says that in the 9th year of his reign, which will be 722, that King Shalmaneser from Assyria, for the third time, comes south and takes over the land of Samaria. What I'd like to do, in fact, is read, because the text is very careful about this, let's read the end of the northern kingdom. And again, ask yourself, what is the cause of God's anger? Is it Adam and Eve's sin? Is it the sin of the Garden of Eden? Is it something like that? Or does the text spell out precisely what God is upset about? For so it was that the children of Israel had sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them up out of the land of Egypt, from under the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and they feared other gods, and had walked in the statutes of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel, and of the kings of Israel which they had made. Also the children of Israel secretly did against the Lord their God things that were not right, and they built for themselves high places in all their cities, from watchtower to fortified cities. They set up for themselves sacred pillars and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. There they burned incense on all the high places like the nations whom the Lord had carried away before them. And they did wicked things to provoke the Lord to anger, for they served idols, of which the Lord had said to them, "You shall not do this thing." It's almost as though the text is trying to replay the whole story and remind us it was one simple thing that God had asked of his nation, and in this sense the northern nation, and that is, do not worship other gods. Well, they failed at that, and in 722, Shalmaneser takes the northern kingdom off to Assyria, And it will be another about 150 years before the southern kingdom falls, for much the same reason. And by the way, we don't have the record of it in our reading here, but it seems that a lot of godly people, a lot of Yahwists, fled south at this time and came into the southern kingdom. One thing to mention in conclusion, this area here, this geographical area, again, Samaria was the capital city it's the third capital, but the last capital of the northern kingdom. This entire area becomes called Samaria, and what happens, and there's a slight difference in meaning, those who settle in this area after the deportation of the Israelites intermarry with Assyrians. Assyrians come in and begin to live here, and they intermarry with some of the leftovers, as it were, some of the poor people that are left over. And that cross marriage between Assyrians and the poor of Israel, their ancestors are called Samaritans. Now, the reason this is important is because if you read the second half of 2 Kings 17, I'd recommend, in fact, it begins in verse 24. 2 Kings 17, 24 to the end of the chapter, verse 41. It's a very long, detailed description of the religious practices of the people who become Samaritans. And now the reason that's important is because by the time we get to Jesus, it's not a footnote, really this is a major point to be made, I guess we could say, that by the time we get to Jesus, these people are arch enemies not just of Jewry or of Judaism, but of Yahwism in particular. In fact, to make sense of a verse in the life of Jesus, listen to this in John 8:48. Jesus had been talking with some people down here in Judea, and notice the accusation they make of Jesus. Then the Jews answered and said to Jesus, "Did we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon?" In other words, the idea of being demonically possessed or worshiping another god, that's part and parcel, that's part of the definition of what it means to be a Samaritan in the days of Jesus. And it has its basis in our story in 2 Kings.